Guys, it's Gina Milicia from ginamilicia.com, and today I want to show you a step-by-step edit of how I created this image and went from this to this only using Lightroom. So here's the image straight out of the camera, and so you can see that I think that I did an okay job with the exposure. It was challenging because I had bright sunlight, and then he was in the shade here, and so the difference between the exposure for the highlight and the shadows is quite extreme. So I sort of did an exposure that was in between so that I could still get a good skin tone, and I know that I can pull out a lot more detail out of the shadows, a lot easier to do that than it is to rescue highlights. So I was mindful of making sure that I did manage to get some details in the highlights, which I did for that. So the first thing I'll do is I want to make sure that I've got a good white balance. So basically what I'm going to do is find a good neutral area. Now when I'm doing a click balance, I try and avoid doing it where there's an overexposed white. That's not going to give you a good white point. I try and find either a mid-grey or a white point where that it is correctly exposed. So it's not the highlight side of it, but somewhere in here, which is a good white point. So I'm going to use that as a click balance, and that gives me a nice neutral looking image so that it wasn't far out, but it's now that it's neutral, and if I want to warm that up, I will do that as I go along with my edit. So the first thing I want to tackle is the highlights. So I'm going to drop down the highlight slider and see if I can rescue those, which I have. That's all looking good. Then I'll tackle the shadows. So I want to bring in some more detail into this area here. And that's looking quite good. Both the cubicles now, we're picking up a lot of great skin tone in here. So I'm happy with how that's looking. Next thing I want to do is make sure I've got a good black point. So holding down the Option or Alt key on a PC and just sliding across to the left. And now we've got a good black point in there. I'll do the same for the white. So holding down the Option or Alt on a PC across to just get a couple of specks of white in there. And again, that's looking good. Next thing I want to do before I do anything else is I want to, my image isn't straight, so it wasn't taken using a tripod, so it's all slightly on an angle. I'll try doing it manually. So I've got the angle. If I find my vertical, I can just draw that on there and it'll straighten it up, and that's not looking too bad now. I'm happy with that. That's looking good. So now that my image is straight, I can start working on tweaking the rest of it. So what I want to do is I want to bring more detail just into the foreground and into the sides of the image. So what I'm going to use is the graduated filter here, and I'm just going to bring it up to the top there, and just bring a little bit more exposure in there. I'll do the same for the walls here. And we'll do the same for this side, coming all the way up to, all right. Now if I grab my brush, what I can do is I like what it's done to most of it, but I don't like that I've lost all my lovely detail inside. So I can now select my brush tool, hold down the Option key, and you can see the brush now becomes an eraser. I can actually increase the size of my brush when it's an eraser, and maybe just increase the feather on that. And I can come in and I can erase what I just did using the marquee, because I was happy with the outside, but I wasn't happy that it darkened some of these areas. I like to see the detail in here. So when you do an adjustment like that, you can actually erase part of it. And so I'll just turn on the overlay so we can see. Where I'm removing it. And it's also hitting in here, which I don't want. Alright, so just turn that off. Alright, so that's where we started. That's where we're at. That's looking pretty good. What I want to do now is just bring a bit more detail into this area here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my radial filter and just bring that up over my washing man, make it a little bit bigger. Okay, and then I'm going to increase my exposure and open up the shadows a little bit. And I don't have a feather on at this stage because I want to see what I'm doing, and I tend to go a little bit overboard. And I had the warming filter on, so we'll take that off. That's probably too much. Alright, and now I'm going to feather it so that blends in the whole. Alright, so we've just added a little, like it's a little spotlight on him. So he's standing out nicely now. I'm pretty happy with that. I might just now go around and get it with a brush. Just burn and dodge a few areas. Just to give it a bit of mood. Alright, and once I'm happy with that, I want to add a bit of clarity overall, just to make it look a bit grittier, because this sort of scene really suits clarity. I'm going to knock back the saturation a little bit and drop down the vibrance, because I want something quite muted and soft. Alright, so we've got before, after. I'm happy with that, and now to finish off the image I want to add a bit of a split tone. So if I go down here to the split tone panel, I'm going to actually choose a nice warm tone for the highlights, and I'm going to get a contrasting bluey teal for the shadows. Alright, and I can just play around with the balance so it's sort of leaning towards more about the highlights, and I might just drop down the saturation of the blue there. And so we've got before, after, and I'm pretty happy with that. I think the last thing I'll do is I'll just give it a bit of sharpening. The first thing I want to do is just mask in the areas so that I'm not sharpening the whole image. So basically I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on the masking, slide that across. So the areas in black will not be affected by the sharpening. It's just, so I want to get the droplets of water and some of the edges of the texture. So that's probably about enough. So they're the areas that will now be sharpened, and I can just bring up the sharpening a little bit there, and it just really makes the water droplets really jump out now. I'm happy with that. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's looking pretty good.